As Tim patrolled the familiar trails, an unusual silence in the old oak tree stopped him cold. Above, a nest with strange markings caught his attention, not matching any local species he'd encountered in his decade as ranger. The area around the tree was eerily still, devoid of the usual wildlife sounds. When he finally climbed to investigate the nest, what he discovered made his blood run cold. If you'd like to hear more stories like this one, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. The morning air was crisp as Tim made his way through the familiar trails of Oakwood National Park. For over a decade, he had walked these same paths, his keen eyes scanning the forest for any signs of disturbance. While most people might find such routine monotonous, Tim never tired of the small wonders that surrounded him. Every rustling leaf, distant bird call, and glimpse of deer brought him the same joy as it had on his first day as a park ranger. Tim knew the park like the back of his hand. Each tree, each clearing, each animal den, they were all etched into his memory after years of careful observation. He could tell when something was out of place, when the natural rhythm of the forest changed even slightly. And today, something was definitely wrong. As he approached the massive old oak tree that marked the halfway point of his morning route, Tim noticed an unusual silence. This particular oak had been home to a pair of songbirds for the past 3 years. Every morning, without fail, their cheerful chirping would greet him, a familiar melody that had become part of his daily routine. But today, there was nothing. Tim stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening as he scanned the area. The park around him continued its normal symphony of sounds. The distant woodpecker, squirrels chattering as they leapt between branches, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. But around this particular tree, there was an eerie bubble of silence. No movement, no calls, not even the faintest flutter of wings. Approaching with cautious steps, Tim peered up at the branches, his experienced eyes searching for the familiar nest. It was still there, nestled in the crook where 3 large branches met. But something was different. The birds were nowhere to be seen. Tim circled the tree, looking for any clues that might explain their absence. It wasn't unusual for birds to leave their nests, but these particular songbirds had been remarkably territorial, never straying far from their home. As he completed his circle, something caught his eye. Strange marks in the soft dirt beneath the tree. They were too deliberate to be natural, too patterned to be random, and they didn't match any animal tracks he knew. They looked human. The marks were fresh, probably made sometime during the night or early morning before his arrival. Boot prints, partially obscured as if someone had tried to cover their tracks, led toward and away from the tree. Tim felt a chill run down his spine despite the warming morning sun. Who would come to this specific tree in the middle of the night, and why? Unable to shake his unease, Tim finished his patrol with distracted thoughts. Throughout the day, his mind kept returning to the empty nest and those strange markings. Something felt deeply wrong, and years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. The next morning, Tim arrived at the park before sunrise, a small collapsible ladder strapped to his back. He moved through the silent forest with practiced ease, making his way directly to the old oak tree. The world around him was still draped in pre-dawn shadows as he carefully set up the ladder beneath the nest. With each step up the ladder, Tim's sense of foreboding grew stronger. As he reached eye level with the nest, what he saw confirmed his fears. The nest had been torn open on one side, the edges jagged and uneven. This wasn't natural decay or weather damage. It wasn't the work of a competing animal. This was deliberate tampering. Tim pulled out his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim morning light. When he peered inside, his hands began to tremble. The familiar blue eggs that should have been there were gone. Instead, nestled among the twigs and feathers, was a single egg unlike any he had ever seen in this forest. It was larger than the songbird eggs, its shell speckled with vibrant patterns of color that had no place in this ecosystem. This wasn't a local species. It didn't belong here. Carefully documenting everything with his phone camera, Tim descended the ladder. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Had someone removed the original eggs and replaced them with this foreign one? Was this some kind of bizarre prank, or something more sinister? Over the next several days, Tim gathered more evidence. He took careful notes, photographed the nest from multiple angles, and collected discarded items he found nearby. A piece of twine that wasn't natural fiber, a torn corner of a plastic bag caught on a branch. He questioned other rangers, but none had noticed anything unusual in their sections of the park. When he casually asked visitors if they had seen anyone around the old oak, a few mentioned seeing shadows moving near the tree at odd hours, but couldn't provide details. Tim's breakthrough came on the 5th day. Arriving even earlier than usual, he followed the faint, partially obscured boot prints deeper into the forest. They led away from the main trails through dense underbrush that would discourage casual hikers, eventually opening onto a small clearing Tim had never discovered before. What he found there made his blood run cold. The clearing contained several empty cages of various sizes, discarded tools, and more strange eggs similar to the one in the nest. Some were carefully packed in padded containers, others simply laid out on a tarp. This was no random act of vandalism. This was organized, methodical, an operation of some kind. With shaking hands, Tim documented everything before retreating. That afternoon, he took his findings to the local police station. He laid out his evidence, explaining the circumstances and his suspicions. The officer taking his statement seemed unimpressed. The officer sighed and explained that without clear evidence of a crime beyond trespassing, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested it was probably just kids messing around in the park after hours. Nothing to get worked up about. Tim left the station feeling deflated but more determined than ever. If the police wouldn't take this seriously, he would have to gather more concrete evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, Tim devoted every spare moment to surveillance. He installed small trail cameras near the oak tree and the hidden clearing. He varied his patrol schedule, sometimes staying in the park late into the evening or arriving hours before his shift. His colleagues noticed his exhaustion but attributed it to personal problems. Tim's persistence finally paid off when his cameras captured clear images of 3 individuals moving through the forest at night, carrying bags and equipment. They wore dark clothing and moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the terrain. When Tim brought these images to the police, along with detailed notes about the pattern of their movements, the authorities finally took notice. Recognizing the potential severity of the situation, the police agreed to set up a proper sting operation. Tim's knowledge of the park proved invaluable as they planned. He helped position officers at key locations and advised on the best approach routes that would minimize noise and visibility. On the night of the operation, Tim waited with 2 officers in a blind near the old oak tree. The minutes stretched into hours, the forest around them gradually falling into the deep silence of midnight. Tim's every nerve was on edge, his senses hyper-aware of every sound and movement in the darkness. Just when it seemed the night might pass without incident, faint rustling caught their attention. Shadowy figures emerged from the trees, moving quietly but confidently toward the old oak. There were 3 of them, just as the cameras had shown, each carrying bags and equipment. As they reached the tree, one pulled out a collapsible ladder much like Tim's own. The police moved with silent efficiency, emerging from their hiding spots and surrounding the intruders before they could react. In the harsh beam of flashlights, Tim could finally see what they had come for. The bags contained specialized equipment for accessing nests without damaging them, containers padded to transport fragile eggs, and detailed maps marking locations throughout the park where specific birds nested. When the police searched their vehicle parked at a discreet distance from the main entrance, they discovered the true extent of the operation. The trunk contained dozens of rare animal eggs carefully packed for transport, exotic bird species that would fetch thousands on the black market, and documentation linking them to buyers across the country and overseas. These weren't just vandals or thrill seekers. They were professional wildlife smugglers who targeted protected species and sold them to collectors willing to pay a fortune for exotic animals. The investigation revealed that they were part of a vast network operating across multiple states, systematically looting national parks and protected areas of their rarest wildlife. The nest in Tim's park had been just one small piece of a much larger operation. The smugglers had been replacing native eggs with similar-looking foreign ones to avoid immediate detection, giving them time to get the valuable eggs to buyers before anyone noticed the switch. Thanks to Tim's persistence and attention to detail, authorities were able to trace connections to other members of the smuggling ring. Over the following months, the entire network was systematically dismantled. The criminals faced severe legal consequences under wildlife protection laws, including substantial fines and prison sentences. As for Tim, his life gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. The park slowly healed from the intrusion, and he took particular satisfaction in watching the forest reclaim the small clearing that had been used by the smugglers. The original songbirds never returned to the old oak tree. Their home had been too thoroughly violated, but nature has a remarkable capacity for resilience. One crisp morning, almost a year after the operation, Tim paused by the old oak during his patrol. A movement caught his eye, and he looked up to see a different pair of birds carefully constructing a new nest in the same crook of branches. A small smile tugged at his lips as he watched them work, carrying twigs and lining their new home with soft materials. The forest was healing, life continuing its eternal cycle. Tim had protected the place he loved, and in doing so, preserved it for countless future generations of both wildlife and visitors. As he continued his patrol, the gentle sounds of the forest surrounded him once again, a symphony he had helped ensure would continue to play. Have you ever encountered something out of place in nature that made you stop and pay attention? What would you have done if you were in Tim's position?